If you are an engineering leader tasked with implementing DevX initiatives at a
scale up,
right?
A
scale up, right? Then great. Like this is the book for you. Hey there, welcome to Book Overflow, this podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I'm Carter Morgan. I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Nathan Toups. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Like, comment, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, all that good stuff. You can join our Discord. It's in the comments. You can also book time with us on Leland in the comments. And just a note about advertising last week. We mentioned we're starting to do advertisements on our audio platforms via Spotify. We had gotten some feedback that there were some weird ads like gambling, which we do not want to make money off of. And Nathan, you found the setting to turn that off, right?
Yeah, I turned off the stuff that we knew that we did not want, and specifically gambling, pharmaceuticals, stuff like that. This is not even topical for our audience.
I know, right? Yeah. I don't know if many of you are needing pharmaceuticals recommended to you, but I think our median age is like 35, so we're all probably pretty good here. Anyhow. So we got that sorted out. Let us know if you hear anything weird, and we want the advertisements to be roughly in line with our values. And yeah, with that, let's talk about the book today, Frictionless. We read the first half last week, reading the second half this week. Let me give you the author introduction and the book introduction. This is written by Nicole Forsgren and Abi Noda. Nicole Forsgren, she is an expert in DevX, DevOps, and decision-making, and is the lead author of the Shingo Publication Award-winning book, Accelerate, The Science of Lean Software and DevOps. Her work on technical practices and development has been published in industry and academic journals and is used to guide organizational transformations around the world. And we have Abi Noda. He is the co-founder and CEO of DevX, where he leads the company's strategic direction and R&D efforts. His work focuses on helping leaders measure and improve developer experience. Before joining DX, Noda held engineering leadership roles at several companies and was the founder and CEO of PolPanda, which was acquired by GitHub in 2019. For the book introduction, we have AI can generate code in minutes, so why does shipping software still take forever? The answer is friction, and invisible barriers that turn quick wins into endless delays. While your competitors ship daily updates, your developers burn out fighting broken tools instead of solving real problems. In Frictionless, developers experience experts Nicole Forsgren and Abi Noda reveal why eliminating friction isn't just about developer happiness. It's about business survival. Drawing from research with hundreds of software teams, they provide a complete 7-step methodology to identify bottlenecks, measure impact, and systematically remove barriers that slow innovation. Whether your teams use AI coding assistants or established workflows, this book shows you how to unlock your engineering organization's full potential. You'll discover how companies like LinkedIn tackle developer friction and transform their business as a result. Okay, so we finished the book. Read the second half this week. Nathan, give me your thoughts on it.
So I don't know if this is the fault of the book or if this is where my headspace is, but I just wasn't feeling the second half of this book. Like I was ready for it to be finished, and it pains me to say this because like I really respect the two authors. I think you had mentioned last week that it felt like it could have been shorter.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe. I'm like fully in that camp now. Like I feel like a good editor could have probably gotten this down to, I don't know, 150, 175 pages.
Right.
It would have been a page turner. It would have been, because like there's a lot of wisdom in here. I really enjoyed, like, I didn't look at anything and go, oh, this is wrong. That's wrong. Like
100%.
Everything in this book's like really good. It's just, I don't know. But it also, like, I've got a lot of stuff going on with work, which is good, but it just didn't, the vibe was off. I don't know.
Yeah. I think about one of our favorite books, A Philosophy of Software Design, and it's short. It's like 120, 130 pages. And I think that book could have all the exact same content and be 2.5 times as long, and it wouldn't be nearly as well received by the general software engineering community. I think there's a little bit of that going on here because I agree with you. The book, all the ideas in it make a lot of sense to me. And I think I never want to criticize books based on like, this book was written for an audience that I'm not part of. Because sometimes books are just written for other people. But I will say that like, when you write a software engineering book, you want to capture a decent amount of people that could be interested in your book. And I'm a software engineer, like I'm a lead software engineer at a startup. Like there's a lot of kind of within the various Venn diagrams of the software engineering community. Like I have a lot of overlap with those areas, right? And so sometimes when I come across a book where I'm like, this really isn't resonating with me, I'm like, well, then who is it resonating with? Like I always joke that like I love Taco Bell and I love in particular Baja Blast, but I don't drink the Mountain Dew Baja Blast, right? I don't drink the sugared version. I drink the diet version, but I like just a little bit of the sugared version in it. So I usually put like a splash in it, right? And then I also wish I could drink it at night, but it's caffeinated and it'll keep me up, right? And so I'm always saying like I want like a 15 calorie caffeine-free Baja Blast. And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm sure they could make that. And I would be the only person in the world who would buy it regularly, right? There's a little bit of that going on with this book where it's like, hey, if you are an engineering leader tasked with implementing DevX initiatives at a
scale up,
a
right?
scale up, right? Then great. Like this is the book for you. For everyone else, yeah, there's so much in this book about like the process of leading these initiatives, when I was hoping this book would be a little more about the actual DevX experience improvements that they've seen happen at other teams that were really transformative, right?
That's really good feedback, because I would say there's these little sections in the book that had these little gray boxes, and it was little case studies.
Yeah.
And I loved those, but they were like, those parts were too short.
Exactly.
And
right.
They didn't have, and again, they didn't really show they had the same problem that the DevOps handbook had, which is they were always the success stories. There wasn't this, I really would love to see, because they would even have chapters that were like, oh, here's what can happen if you don't get the right buy-in, or you're actually building the wrong product, right? Because the things I love in this book is they do kind of, they make DevOps folks think about a product that they're building, and that the product and the customer is the other engineers in the company. And I think it's a beautiful, like forward thinking way of looking at this. But I wish that there was more cautionary tales. And maybe it's just because companies don't want to admit when they really screwed up. But I would love to know if like Dropbox had 3 false starts getting a DevX initiative going, and the third strategy is what actually worked, and here's why the first 2 failed. I would be so happy with just that. Yeah.
And especially because and I mentioned this last week, and I think having read the whole book now, I feel a little more confident in saying this, that like they wrote this book about DevX kind of before AI, and then AI came along, and then they kind of they latched onto something really true, which is, and I believe this, which is that companies with good developer experience operations are going to succeed. It has become even more leverage in the age of AI, because good developer experience leads to fast iteration cycles, and kind of good gatekeeping around making bad changes, and all of that, if you're unleashing autonomous agents on your code base, is super valuable today. And so I thought, like, great, like a book that's tackling that. And then it just kind of always came across as a bit more of an afterthought, because I'm of the belief that software engineering as a profession is going to look more and more like platform engineering has in the past, right? Where I think companies are going to become more and more comfortable with non-technical people creating pull requests on the code base, which I actually think is great, because I hate when I get a ticket that's like, adjust this copy, right? Or fix this padding, or the color is wrong. I'm just like, do you know how much you pay me? Like, you're paying me to fix that? And so I think if you can kind of farm out some of that lower level work to designers and product managers, like, that's fantastic. But then what becomes the role of software engineers? It's how do you construct a code base where all those proper guardrails are in place and where it's easy to contribute to? And so I think we're all going to be kind of like enablement engineers to some degree. Someone needs to write that book about what engineering organizations might look like. I thought that would be this book, and it just it wasn't quite. It was much more focused on like, how do I as a VP get buy-in and implement and conduct DevX improvement initiatives.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Super astute observations.
well, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk about all of it. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. All right, let's get into this. I want to start off with something I just found funny. Like, and again, like this book will kind of like throw a bone to be like, and if you're at a startup, this is good too. But then it's a little like this. You can tell this book is just clearly written for like a scale up or a thing or something like that, because chapter 36 is like share your progress, right? And it's like, how often should you share your progress? And I just thought it was funny. I just highlighted this, put LOL. It said executive stakeholders twice yearly. And I was just like, I was like, so the most executive stakeholder is John, our CEO, who sits 2 desks down from me. And I was just cracking up this idea that like twice a year I'd let John know how things are going.
Yeah.
Right.
And, and we will say, right, like Nicole Forsgren works at the biggest, most successful the biggest, most successful tech companies, a bunch of Fortune 500 companies. Abi is a CEO of DevX, which of course got acquired by Atlassian, and their target audience are literally these, scale ups to the big companies. And so, I get it. He has a book. He's going to do the speaking circuit. He's going to talk about this stuff. This is the core audience of potential customers for DevX. And despite all of that, there's still so many good nuggets of wisdom, right?
Right.
And I wish the same thing, like, and maybe it's just because the audience isn't there. Maybe there's the reason that there's no books, but like we read the web scalability for startups book.
Yeah. By Artur Edgemont.
Yes. And I would love a DX for startups, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Maybe this will be the first Book Overflow book that we write.
Like, because it is just so critical. It's so critical these days, right?
Yep. And they make this fantastic argument, and they do, again, they throw a bone to these things, and they're like, hey, these patterns and these ideas are not just for the bigger companies, because the companies that reduce friction are going to run circles around the companies that don't, right? And I think there's this overarching theme, which is like, hey, if your build pipeline takes a minute, and in that 1 minute, you're also running all your test suite and you're doing all these other things, you have this super optimized thing, the friction's so low for anyone to contribute and get direct feedback that wouldn't you want to live in that world? And you don't wait until you have 300 engineers to do that. This is something that's actually least painful to do if you just do it up front. If you do it up front when you have 5 engineers and you're like pedantic about a build pipeline that you all understand, it's not flaky, that works the way it should, right? It's not wasted effort. And I think that this is a powerful idea in here that isn't as emphasized as I wish it was, right?
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, like, especially in an AI age, I think a lot of those kind of like DevX improvements, like I just know like the kind of classic startup thing is like, well, we can't worry about DevX because we just got to ship and do, and we're building the product out. And there's truth to that, but it's also like a lot of these kind of basic things, especially at a startup level, don't take that long to figure out. Right. And like, I just remember like when I joined my startup and my first day there, someone said like, hey, is the site down? Someone's like, oh yeah, I'm just doing a deploy. I'm like, what the freak is going on? Right. And then like, and so that was the first thing I was like, we got to fix that. Like we can't go down every time we deploy.
Exactly. It's the frog in the boiling water piece. And I'm going to bring it back to something that's not brought up in the book, but I think is useful to think about is, if you're in a Michelin rated restaurant and you've got all these people coming in, your kitchen is going to be super organized, right? How you do prep, how you source the food, the processes and procedures for getting food out in a timely fashion so that it's, presented beautifully and all these things. You can think of this as similar to a mature DevX org, right? Yes, you came to the restaurant to have a delicious meal that's plated in front of you and, meets all your criteria. But the way that you structure the kitchen, the way that the chef engages with all this stuff, that's the DevX part, right? You make the kitchen as easy as possible to flow as smoothly as possible, deal with these surprises that come in, deal with, mistakes and all this other stuff. That's DevX. Those rules still apply if you have a food truck, right? If you have a food truck and there's 2 people, you still need to do meal prep. you still need to lay your kitchen out in a way that's useful. And I will tell you that the food trucks that are super disorganized are going to lose against the food truck that's super organized, right?
Right.
You're some taco truck that can't get your act together,
Right.
and it
Right.
takes 15 minutes to make 2 tacos, or you have the taco truck that takes like 3 minutes to get your tacos. You're going to be much more successful, right? You'll be able to do all this stuff. And so I do think that it's the same sort of idea. It's like, yeah, even if you're this tiny little idea of a business versus some big thing, all along the way, you have to follow this success with like how you structure your work.
Well, so I want to ask you a question from your experience, because you've worked at kind of like Series C startups, right? Just, a little bit, a couple hundred engineers. Whereas I've kind of only like, I've worked at little, like Series A startups, and I've worked at big tech companies. And so, because there's just, and again, this book will kind of just throw out like an interesting idea. I'm like, wait, talk about that a little more, right? Where this idea of almost like peer leadership and like starting out on your own team, because it's a little like, if you're at a really small place, like there's no one to talk to about DevX. Like you have a team, there's maybe 2 or 3 teams, like talk to the 2 or 3 other engineers who matter, and kind of get your act together and figure this stuff out. And then at the really big companies, it's a little like you can't even begin if you're like a kind of like a lead software engineer, because you're often using these giant, like, for example, if you're like Amazon, like they have their whole kind of proprietary build pipelines, right? And so it's hard to like as a team be like, we're going to make our process better, because you're often relying on like these big infrastructure teams to kind of control that whole process, right? But what about the middle ground where you're using like standard tooling? You're on like GitHub Actions, right? But it is a little bigger than your own team, and so there is a need to enable other teams to move faster. I mean, what does DevX look like at that scale?
Yeah, so this has been interesting because I actually am in the middle of. I feel very lucky. I finally have gotten enough critical mass for Rojo Roboto, and I've got some long-term work where we're working on some deep platform engineering processes at a company that's ready to take this to the next level. And then I also am working with some early stage startups that they've already kind of found a tangled mess, right? There's some tangled messes where they're trying to untangle it. They're realizing that there's this, I guess we talked about in fundamentals of software architecture, it's the last responsible moment. We maybe have exceeded the last responsible moment. It's maybe a little bit irresponsible at this point, but they're correcting course. I think it's sort of like, how do you teach a kid math? There's a maturity level, right? So at one level, you need to get them to get the fundamentals of like adding and subtracting and multiplying, dividing. Perfect example of this is my daughter is 10, and she had a bunch of homework that we took during a long break. The summer is the winter,
right?
So they had a long break and they had some stuff, and I was looking at this. I'm like, this is multivariable algebra, where you're having to simplify things in terms of one variable and get a number, and then you plug it back in. I was like, why are they teaching this to a 10-year-old? This is kind of insane. And I'm looking at it, and so I would sit down and just like, hey, I'm gonna have to teach you the fundamentals of algebra.
Right.
And of course, she's horrified at first, and then we spend a little bit of time, and she gets it. And now she like can't be stopped. Well, it turns out I was out of line. This was like 7th grade math. My daughter's in like 5th grade math, and they were just teaching pre-algebra concepts. And there was like some shortcuts and context I didn't have on like how you can use little blocks and you know, kind of like hack your way around it. But I taught her actual algebra, and so I would say that like you can prematurely optimize. Like this wasn't cargo culting. She was able to, in about a 1 month period, learn the fundamentals of algebra.
Nice.
And she's going to be able to take that with her. That's great. Most startups should not do that. And what I mean is that like your maturity level is use the hack that kind of gets you kind of there, good enough to get you to the next level. And as long as you're directionally in the right idea, like, okay, I can introduce a couple of concepts of algebra, but we're not doing full blown multivariable algebra. We're not going to get into calculus. We're not going to get into like all these other, geometry and all these other kind of abstract concepts. And so like, I think that there's a maturity level piece, which is like, okay, we're doing push-based, deploy and pray kind of deployments with our CI pipeline. We have something basic here. We want to introduce pull-based, right? We want to introduce this idea that CI is going to be separate from CD, right? You can introduce this concept without having to go all the way down hermetic builds and Argo CD and all these like crazy cool tools. But when there's 5 people in your startup and it's not a core competency, you still maybe just introduce a new concept, and you do it to reduce toil. You do it to reduce friction, and understanding the right boundary for that is not easy, right? It's giving yourself the grace, I should say, to say this idea was serving us well when we were this size. We have stress cracks on it. We have to reimagine it. I wish there was a book for this. Again, I get back to this idea of like, it would be really nice to be like, hey, our company's at this level. Here's the maturity checklist of,
Right.
These are like, you must have this by this size, or, and then you should need to kind of like think about these kind of things coming up. Cause, I think that's the idea is like, if you're on this growth trajectory as a startup and you're getting funding, we need to have that. I think what Kent Beck calls like the optionality stuff, right?
Right.
Which is build the system so that I know that I'm going to introduce this thing later, but right now we don't quite need it. And you're right. You're like, if you sit 2 desks away from your CEO and you're probably on Slack all the time and you're probably deeply collaborative, it is comical to say like, here's how you present the 2 major updates twice a year that you're going to talk to him about, right? So.
Right. And there is a lot of value. This book does talk about like, well, how are you selling to executive leadership? And, like again, the things we care about as engineers, even if sometimes we have a bad job translating those into what a business cares about, right? Like we want to say we should be faster because that'll make our job more fun. When you need to be saying we should be faster because then we can iterate quickly. And in a startup, finding what works and what doesn't. Like my boss says this all the time, right? Which I remember like when I joined a startup, when I joined, like I was just very used to like, again, kind of like the big tech cadence. And we had this feature we wanted to push out, and but it wasn't like, we're not a B2B startup. So it's not like we had committed to the client that we would have this done. This was just a feature that we thought would be helpful. And so we had committed to get it done that month. And then the month is coming to an end and it wasn't done. And so we had the whole team swarm on it and kind of like really hustle and crank it out. And like I was a little like, to me, I hadn't done something like that in a long time, especially when it didn't seem like it was motivated by any sort of extraneous deadline. And so I asked him, I said like, why did we do that? Like, why didn't we just like push it out a week and say like, well, it'll just get done next week? And he's like, you know what? We're just at a startup, and we say all the time at my company, like startups are dead by default. And you need more at bats. You need more swings, because it's not guaranteed that every swing is going to be a home run. Right. And so just the more swings we can take, the better odds that we will, that we'll find something that works. And we can take more swings if we move faster, and you can move faster if you have good DevX.
Exactly. And this gets all the way back to things like Accelerate and the other parts, which is that there's a real, and I struggle. I'm a recovering, I would call it a PR hoarder or something, where I'm like, if I just had a little bit more time, this PR is going to be perfect. Then I'm not going to waste people's time. And the better thing to do is to figure out how to break up a bigger problem, the smaller ones that don't have side effects, faster, right?
Right.
Is there a way for me, one way to increase your velocity is to break your problem up into smaller pieces that, and think about the no side effect portion of it and ship those things faster and get feedback faster. Faster doesn't just mean, I have this 10,000 line of code change, and how do I get that 10,000 line of code change faster? It's probably not a good idea. It'd be like, well, is there a way that I can just preempt what I know I need for the auth module, make that update so that when I have this other piece and ship that, have it reviewed, the team that cares about auth, it's like, oh, cool. This is cool. This will be neat. This new feature that you need for auth, so that I can build this thing next, and just ship that thing, show that it has no side effects, have it deploy out, even if it's behind a feature flag, if you have to, and then build the next feature that you have that gets to use the new auth module. Well, the auth module is not going to break in this deploy because it already went out. It's like it starts changing on like, how do I keep this velocity of just shipping incremental value? It reduces the risk of you stepping on toes from other people. It makes it easier for you to adjust if you realize, 3 days in that the CEO's focus has changed, where you're like, oh, that's no big deal. Like I still ship these other valuable pieces. I can just kind of like change my focus for this downstream stuff. And I think it's thinking about a problem will never go out of fashion, right? And so
Right.
like I think that and actually, so where we're picking up in the book is we were pretty far into part 4, which is the 7-step process, and I'll kind of mention the 7 steps real quick. And we start off this week with 6 and 7. So yeah, we'll leave that to the audience to have their kids chime in on 6, 7. So step 1 is start your DevX journey. It's like, how do you even get started, right? Then you start small and get quick wins. They give you a bunch of strategies on this. Use data to optimize your own DevX work. Step 4 is decide strategy and priority. Step 5 is sell your strategy. And that's where we left off. Selling your strategy, in which, again, excellent advice for any scale. I would say even if you're not doing DevX, this is like just good, like career management, business advice that is just generally applicable with the lens of sort of a platform DevX kind of person. But step 6 and step 7, I think we can talk about together, which is drive change at your scale, and yours in parentheses. And it didn't. They threw us a bone. There's like some mentioning of different types of businesses. And then step 7 is evaluate your process. Evaluate your progress and show value. So yeah, what did anything in step 6 and 7 stick out to you here? Or
yeah, again, I think maybe some things would have a little more if it were. It just, it's very clearly written for like very big organizations. I did like, well, I guess this isn't step 6 and 7. Is it step 6 and 7?
Well,
I'm looking at part 5. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that stuck. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just, there's a lot of like collecting data and analyzing data, and like I get it. That sounds very important if you are a VP at a big company leading this initiative, and I'm just cracking up at the idea of me trying to like collect data from my 9 teammates, right? Like the data is just,
This is good though. I'll push back in the sense that there are, so for a maturity level, and again, I think that you have to frame it in this. If you had the goal of our build pipeline has 5 minutes of downtime every time we deploy, the data there, and the only data that you would need is how much downtime do you have after your updates, right? And if you get that down to 0 because you have 0 downtime deployments, you don't have to measure this on like some Power BI dashboard, but you are gathering this up that you can actually say like, oh, we got it down to 3 minutes, we got it down to 2 minutes, we got it down to 0 because we now have a proper, blue-green, or we have a proper canary deploy process. Measuring that thing that we don't regress, that when we do a change management, it should always stay at 0, is useful. And then that part becomes useful because it's just an uptime measurement, right?
Right.
If I just start measuring uptime, the old system would show that I have, I'm only doing, 99.5% uptime or whatever, because we have these 5-minute deploys, or probably way worse, it might be like 93% uptime or whatever. And then you show that, oh, you know what? Since doing canary builds, we've got 4 nines of uptime and availability on our front end for the end user facing piece. Like, it's a useful metric. It shows that we can't have regression. It's something you would want to measure even that early on. And I have a buddy who worked at, who was it? Favor. Are you familiar with the company called Favor?
I'm not familiar with Favor.
Okay. So Favor was like a delivery service that got acquired by a Texas grocery chain. So maybe it was just an Austin, Texas thing that
cool.
took on. But they do a bunch of logistics for delivery of groceries and things.
Right.
And they went from, I think they had some sort of internal regression that went from like, 5 nines to like 4 9.5, right? Or something.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal, right? It was like a big deal internally. And they had a whole post-mortem on how did they get to 4 9.5, because this one service, it was like mission critical, right? Like the way that this worked. And I loved that sort of engineering maturity, right? Where they are like, hey, this is not okay. We're not going to get used to this. We're not going to adjust to this. What did we do? What did we change that would allow this to happen? We're so proud of our 5.9s. And you could only do that if you're measuring in some consistent way. So,
okay, so that brings up an interesting point and taps into the zeitgeist a little bit, because ostensibly this book is about AI. And I think like GitHub, like it's been funny, like, you know, I think GitHub had put out some press release about how like all their code is AI generated now, or like their engineers are so AI powered, but like someone quote tweeted it and just showed like GitHub's uptime in the past 6 weeks or whatever, and they're at like 99.1%, which is crazy for GitHub.
No bueno.
And I think, you know, we've talked about AI and we're genuine believers in how it's transforming the workflow. And I'll give a special sneak peek for our listeners. Carl Brown, Internet of Bugs, we actually just yesterday recorded another interview with him, and I thought I'm still thinking about a lot of the stuff we said there, but he had a lot of thoughts about AI and just kind of like how we're moving up another layer of abstraction, but it's still important to understand the layer beneath that abstraction. Anyhow, lots of interesting stuff. But I think you and I are convinced that software engineering as a profession is here to stay, right? What the exact impact of that looks like, we're still unsure. But we also believe that AI has kind of very fundamentally transformed our workflows. But so you look at a company like GitHub, where like they're seeing uptime problems. And I think SaaS stocks have really cratered, because the big question is like, could you run Calendly with like 20% of the workforce? And we talk about this with Carl Brown, where I'm like, I don't think anyone's going to disrupt Walmart because they vibe code a better Walmart. Like there's just too many other competencies Walmart has baked in that are not software related. But these SaaS companies, could you make a version of Calendly that which you run with 20% of the workforce if you are kind of totally all in on AI, and then you can offer Calendly at a lower margin? I think one, give me your thoughts on like, is that even true? Do you even think that hypothesis holds? And two, could you even do that and maintain engineering quality? Or do you see something like GitHub where you're not even at 5.9s, you're at 2.9s these days, right?
Yeah, no, this is interesting. I think that there is there's a few things which I've heard expressed pretty well, which was, you know, SaaS stocks are given a price to earnings ratio, right? It's so many multiples of their annual revenue, typically, if they're publicly traded. And the idea is how big the moat is, how much we can project into the future that the value of this company is there, right? Like that's a very liberal sort of like investor, centric way of looking at it. So if you're doing 10x or 25x price to earnings ratio, some really high number, it's kind of the market saying, hey, there's 10 years or 25 years of certainty around the fact that this is bringing disproportionate value and it will continue to increase in its value over time. And that to build a replacement for it would cost 25x annual revenue, right? Or whatever.
Right.
So we're kind of reducing these ideas. So two things. Number one is, have we been consistently overvaluing these SaaS companies? And number two is the cost of actually replacing them gone down? And I will say, like, I agree with the Walmart piece that logistically it's just so complex. But is there a worse is better competitor to Calendly that could be coded with a team of talented engineers and a good skill set that gets you most of the way there? And I do think that companies like that are at risk, because though I'm guarantee you that I can't just straight up replace Calendly, could I make a tool that has a basic amount of scheduling, conflict resolution, a sign up form, and some other stuff? And you think about it and you're like, I think that this is actually possible, and the market would adjust that. So if they were doing 7 times price to earnings ratio, maybe it goes down to 3. The idea being that with the equivalent of 3 years of revenue, could you make a viable, good enough replacement for a decent number of people in that market? And I think that that's an interesting way of framing it. Whether that's really true or not, I'm not an investor. I'm just trying to, I'm like, this is my sort of barstool, argument. I don't think SaaS is dead, But I do think that the idea that SaaS can basically charge whatever they want because it's just too logistically difficult to get
Right.
the 5% of features that you actually want out of it, that's changed. And I'll say this with Book Overflow is a good example. I've made a really crappy content management system for Book Overflow if you think of it in the sense of a generalized content management system.
Right.
But I've made a really nice purpose-built content management system for exactly what Book Overflow needs. Like, we have this concept of episodes, we have the concept of series of episodes, we have the concept of guests, and people in a book versus people in an episode. I have this very clean relational database based off of these things. I can generally just add content in there now. It's really easy for us to share links. All the things I would have traditionally probably just like built on top of some generic content management system. And I didn't need that. And so like,
Right.
and I was able to do, and again, I'm not a normal person. Like, I'm a software engineer who's, worked in a lot of spaces around this, but I use it as an experiment to vibe code a few things. It's good enough. Maybe I'll get twisted up into tech debt or something, but I don't think so because I have a really clear idea and I'm not leaning on some generic fix-all version of a content management system to try to solve a short-term problem. And so I think that, I think a world in which we can build purpose-built software for very specific needs is going to make it a lot easier, which means that the baseline subscriber base that's kind of overfitting on what a software as a service does isn't great anymore. And this gets back into lots of stuff, right? Like, I think that people are going to start self-hosting more things that just make sense for them.
Right.
And then, use WorkOS or use, other big linear or these other tools that are super high value, right? They're going to just have to double down on being so good at being sort of the, nerve core of a more complex system that they really become even more valuable, right? I think certain SaaS companies are just going to become more valuable, and then a lot of them are going to go by the wayside.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Like, SaaS as a category is not dead. Like, I'm very skeptical of like Susan from accounting is going to vibe code QuickBooks on her lunch break, right? Like, and companies do not want to maintain this software, but we keep using Calendly. I don't even think Calendly's public. I hope Calendly's not public. What are we doing?
And also, I will say, I'm not going to vibe code a replacement for Calendly. I like Calendly.
Yeah, no, we use Calendly, but
yeah, it's great.
So
I'm picking on them because it's it's something I can wrap my head around. So.
And like, we're never going to. Yeah, I'm with you. We're never going to vibe code a replacement. Like, we like Calendly, but could a company 20% the size of Calendly come along and vibe code their own Calendly, and then that puts pressure on Calendly? Now they've got to do layoffs. They got to thin their organization. I don't know. And so, like, I think these kind of purpose-built tools are always going to exist, and people will still continue to subscribe to them. Will they just get cheaper, which is good for the consumer, right? Like, if SaaS gets cheaper, like, some SaaS is just exorbitantly expensive, but from a software engineer, like, obviously a decent number of us are employed by these SaaS or SaaS adjacent companies. But then I think we're talking about this because we're talking about it in the context of Frictionless. It's like, if you wanted to kind of take on, if you wanted to be the challenger and say, I'm going to do what you do, but way leaner, right? Like, right. I actually think that to me sounds like a very, very interesting software engineering challenge. I keep thinking, like, I have never read Dune. I've only seen the movies, but I know enough about Dune. And I know that in Dune, the spice that they get on the planet Dune is really valuable, because the only way to navigate like interstellarly in the Dune universe is that, like, you have to have a human navigator do it, but there's so many kind of like components going on with like interstellar navigation that you need to manage. They have to consume this spice to be like have like superhuman instinct and comprehension or whatever, right? And so like that's why the spice is so powerful. And I just keep thinking back to that, and I'm like, is that the future of software engineering? Right? That like I just have like 20 agents and I'm just like super locked in, like managing them all. And I don't know, right? Like, there's still enough that I do where having a human in the loop seems really valuable. I don't know. Maybe that's what software engineers are.
But I also think that it could be that we ended up having these little like micro agents that are more like Unix daemon processes, right? Where they're
Right,
just kind of
right.
doing a lot of little bitty tight feedback loop, very tightly scoped maintenance pieces. This actually reminded me of something that came up from a Google report years ago, where I think it was, I mean, it was a decade ago. I can't quite remember. But Google was talking about their version control system, which is not Git. They have some much more complex thing, and you can just check out parts of the code base that you're working on. But Google's famous for having this monorepo that's like billions of lines of code or something. But more machines make changes to the code than humans do, and it has been like that for a very long time. And again, a lot of it's deterministic stuff. It's not large language models doing it, but they had systems that were enforcing correctness and doing these things, and could refactor or do fixes or do all kinds of stuff. And humans were still in the loop, I'm pretty sure, at least back when I was reading this report. I'm sure a lot of this is outdated, but it struck me that I think it was something like 2-to-1 or something. Again, roast me in the comments, but the idea was Google had already gotten to a point in which humans were obviously guiding everything, and there's still a tremendous amount of software engineering happening, but there's a lot of minutia that it doesn't really need to be done by humans, and that the relationship between what we allow to be autonomous and go through these quality gates and do these things safely, and what needs to be, a software engineer sits down and does it themselves, those lines are getting blurred more and more. And I think they were living in the future, and this has kind of become more widely disseminated. I think that there's lots of, and I've been in different projects. I was in a project not too long ago where they used Claude Code. They had like a Claude Code bot in GitHub that was a code review bot, right?
Right.
And it just sat there and just like whatever code I wrote, it would kind of do like a code review as a senior software engineer and like just bring up stuff and be like, hey, this is inconsistent, or do this or that. And it was actually like, sometimes I would ignore the feedback, or sometimes I'd be like, oh, you know what? That's a really good point. I really actually need to incorporate this before I actually ask another human to do the code review. And it made my PRs just better. And I actually really appreciated it. Even if sometimes it would hallucinate really hilarious things, right? And this is a few months back. And, but I would love it if there was this like, you could imagine these little agents that have very narrow scope, like, your security audit agent and these other ones that kind of help me just move things faster. Because again, if I could get an agent to give me a quicker feedback loop so that my code review is better for the human, that reduces friction, right? This is a way for me to not waste other people's time, have a coding buddy who's got a, kind of taking a fresh set of eyes, which is what a large language model does every time. And so, yeah, I think this is one of the things I loved in chapter 35. They talk about this, and this gets back to DevOps handbook. They say, communicating your results, right? Communicating your results should really come down to data that supports things like time savings, reducing toil, and improving focus time, right? Like, those are just some examples of some stuff. And those are three that I end up bringing up a lot, because improving focus time is just, focus is a superpower. I tell my daughter this all the time. I was like, focus is a superpower. And we're in a world that's constantly distracting us, right? You really have to fight to have focus time. And focus time also is there for aha moments. Like, we were just talking about this at breakfast this morning. And I was like, you can't schedule an aha moment. You have to like work on something, and you have to have a regular cadence to show up and work on the thing. But the aha moment happens when an aha moment happens, right? You don't know when a breakthrough is going to be there. You don't know when something's going to click. You don't know when the design finally gets to the right spot that solves the problem at work. And so if that only happens when you're focused and you're constantly distracted, it means you're missing out on aha moments all the time.
Right.
And that's where the deeper part of this book, I think, is really powerful. Again, I wish it was more succinct. I wish that they had, maybe consulted with John Osterhout and learned how to make a 120-page book. But yeah, I think there's such powerful ideas in here that I don't want to gloss over. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's well, you say there are ideas you don't want to gloss over. I mean, are you talking about just what you mentioned there, or are there other things that you wanted to make sure we got to?
Yeah. So like, one of the things I thought was really good, and this is hard. I get it. I will tell you that it maybe at an early stage startup, it doesn't feel like that much of a focus, you can really lose credibility. But it's like, how do I tie an initiative back to like cost savings? Or how do I tie it to moving the needle on revenue that comes in, right? Like if I say, oh, we did this thing and we have this many engineers and now we've got, $1 million in our pocket because we've saved so much time. If you come up with some grandiose number, you better be able to defend it, right?
Right.
If you say, oh yeah, you're at a 5-person engineering team and you say, we've saved $5 million of engineering time, they're like, you didn't.
Right.
But if you said, you know what, we've unblocked, we found that because of the friction on our build pipelines, that for engineers to stay busy, they had to context switch 3 times every day because of being blocked in their continuous flow. And that we've realized that it slowed down feature development by 20%, right? And if you have real data behind this and you say, so we did this thing, and we actually have this many meaningful features. We're going 20% faster, and we've actually reduced the number of rollbacks that we've had to do because of the focus time. Really shows that, right? If you can make this case that, hey, you basically have you've actually hired an extra. If you have 5 engineers and you get 20% time back, you've actually hired a 6th engineer in the amount of time you got back, right? Without having to hire one, right? You virtually hired one, and so. These are the kind of things that if you learn how to measure yourself and you learn how to tie it into the impact that you're driving in the company, this kind of gives you this nice feedback loop to figure out it's not just, oh, can I impress my boss or can I impress the CEO? It's like, hey, Carter's solving real categorical problems here. He identified that we could be 20% faster, which for us is a huge deal. And he figured out a way to do this and he pushed his way through even when it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But you can't argue with the numbers. That's amazing. And I love it that we get to get features out the door faster, right? Not saying that this is easy, but again, this book does a good job of being don't make up numbers, have real things to back it up. And if you can do this, sometimes you get super lucky, and you realize that you've found some order of magnitude improvement, in some system that you're building. And of course you should brag about it if you find that.
And it reminds me of Staff Engineer by Will Larson, where one of the big lessons from Staff Engineer is you really have to pick your battles and you have to make sure you're working on high impact stuff. And, a book like this could be helpful for someone who has been tasked with making some big improvements across DevX at a large organization where they are looking for cost savings, probably on on the order of $5 million, something like that. And it can be tough. I mean, I'm sure I've told this story on the podcast before, but I remember, did I tell this last week about when I had to implement a feature at one of my companies that took longer than I thought it would?
It might have been last week, but it was recently. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just remember. I won't give the whole thing. I just remember we had a feature, we had to implement it. It was supposed to take 3 months. It wound up taking more 7, not all the way through, but just it was probably 4 months of active work and then 3 months of kind of waiting on other people and things like that. When it was done, I was really excited that we got it done. And my manager was just if I had known it would take that long, we wouldn't have done it in the first place. And that was a real gut punch and a learning moment to me to be it's not just about getting the work done. It's about making sure that you're getting the work done in a way that justifies the investment. And so, if you are running a DevX initiative and you're good news, all teams now have linters. Isn't that great? As an executive, you might be well, why do I care about linting? Right. And so, the book mentions you should start small. You should get some quick wins, right? That helps you that works, gets your flywheel spinning faster. You get trust with organizations.
And right? I'm just going to riff on this one. Why would a linter, and why would, as a platform engineer, would I go and say, you know what, it's linters, right? That's my thesis.
Exactly. Right.
So if I was going to, I would be you know what? I did my qualitative and quantitative analysis. I talked to the engineers. The number of nitpicks in a code review is driving them crazy.
Right. Yeah.
We looked at what the nits were. Oh, it's just coding style for certain types of things. Oh man, a linter could fix all of these things. And half the feedback is, hey, did you run the linter before you did the thing? We stuck it in the CI. It fails before humans even involved. Or we even put it in a, pre-push hook or whatever. And then all of a sudden, PR review time decreased by 50%, right? Bam.
Right.
All of a sudden, now you have a real number that your CEO would care about. You're like, hey, I helped reduce PR review time. You've complained that we have these features sitting there in review but not being done. And this was one of the biggest friction points, and now people are happy to do a code review, right?
Yeah, you know what? Like I think, yeah, you know what? I'll take it back. Maybe linting. Maybe there is a scenario where
doing it just because that's the right thing to do is
right.
the bad idea. Like you have to tie it back to some value. And it could be, hey, we thought that the linter would make a difference and it actually didn't. Oops. Like, how do I qualify this better next time? Right. Like these are, but again, it's patterns over tools. I think I've said this in the past. I'm a big advocate for it here. And this actually ties in. I think it was the end of one of the chapters that said, the ultimate goal isn't building the perfect DevX team, but creating an organization where developer experience is valued, measured, and continuously improved, right? And this ties into DevOps in general, which is this idea that like, hey, DevX is just part of the process. Are we struggling with something? Maybe we should look at the DevX portion of this and see like, oh, you know what? The new person that we hired, how many days did it take them to do their first code commit, right? Meaningful code commit. Oh man, it takes a week. Why does it take a week for a new engineer to do their first commit? Like, what could we do to make it fun and incentivized and not scary? So as soon as they have access to the systems, we can encourage them to open their first PR, right? Even if it's just a baby PR. And because I think I've seen this friction of like, oh, I don't even know where to get started. I don't even know the right way to do this, or am I going to break something? And getting them over that hurdle is like an excellent sort of like, and any size startup can do that, right? You can do this when you've got interns, and it's the first time they've ever used Git or something.
Well, before we wrap up, I think I just like to mention chapter 60. It's one of the final chapters. Maintain your metrics like any product. A shout out for that, even if you are not involved in any sort of DevX experiment or experience initiative. Yeah, like your metrics are everything. Your metrics are what are giving you a clear insight into the health of any system, right? And the moment you can't trust your metrics, they're useless. And so I think metrics do need to be maintained. I found an issue a couple weeks ago where we were failing to export about a quarter of our metrics. So our traffic just looked a lot lower than it actually was. And I need to be better about like setting up some sort of automated alarm so we know when that happens. But at any rate, the moment you can't trust your metrics, you're flying blind. So, big shout out for keeping good, clean metrics on any product you're working on.
Yeah, I think another thing that stood out to me, I think there's a section, there's a few chapters before the one you just talked about, but it's about tool standardization. And I would say tool standardization may be a bit premature for early stage startup, or it's just implied because you only have a couple tools.
Right.
The idea behind tool standardization is you end up getting these things called like scorecards. In bigger organizations, you might have something that's like gold tier, silver tier, bronze tier. You may have read this chapter and thought, oh man, this is like way overkill. But the idea behind it is that we like golden paths are the blessed paths. So if you do this, it's something that maybe the DevX team or whoever's thinking about it, you're like, hey, this will just work. You don't have to think about it. This is the way that we set up pipelines. There's zero maintenance. It's the golden path. But we need to support alternate paths, right? So silver tier or bronze tier is this idea that like bronze tier would be like approved experiments. Like maybe your team has a hypothesis that like Circle CI is better than GitHub Actions, right? And that your microservice that you're working on, whatever you're having to do coordinating GitHub Actions just slowing you down. We want permission that Circle CI is okay to use. And let's say it gets approved. And then you make this case like, hey, Circle CI does this one thing that fits our cycles really well. And we think that actually the whole organization should go to it. I like to cultivate environments in which those experiments, those like sort of focused experiments are fine as long as they don't negatively impact the rest of the tools. But you need to still have constraints around that. And I think Adobe, they had a case study here. Adobe said that gold technologies aren't just winners. They basically they think of them as like a venture capital firm who's like put a bunch of resources into certain startups, and certain startups start blowing up. It's that gold is a description of concentrating resources on things that have the greatest impact, right? So something becomes a gold path for your DevX initiatives when you go, hey, every dollar that we invest in this thing, we get 5x return, right? Or every time that we do this thing has this huge impact. And so that you should basically fund the winners. That's kind of like how you think of it, is it's, you know, and if you as an engineer think about how can I build golden path DevX tools, or how can I build things that disproportionately positively impact the organization? I think it's like a fun way of thinking about how you build stuff.
Well, why don't we can wrap up with some of our hot takes, and I think listeners, sometimes we'll do this hot take section and we'll just kind of reiterate things we've said throughout the episode. You might say, like, why do they even have this section at the end if they're just going to reiterate? But I actually find this is a good forcing function for Nathan and I when we are like reading a book. I just remember we read a book a while back, which we were fairly critical of, and we were a little nervous. We're like, our audience not going to like it. And you guys were like, we love it. We love when you guys are honest and give us your opinions. So we're like, okay, great. We want to try to do that more throughout regular episodes. So I mentioned that because my hot take is what we've talked about this whole time. This book is just too long. Like this. And I think it's one thing to say that like a 300-page book could probably be 270 pages or could probably be 260 pages, right? Like I'm like, who cares? Like, you're nitpicking here. This book could be half the length, and it would be better for it. And so I'm not exactly sure what happened in the editing process to make this book so long. But yeah, I wish, again, someone needs to write the book that's like, these are the effective DevX patterns you should leverage to make AI operate effectively on your code base. I understand if this book isn't that, although I do think that the framing around how it's built is interesting. But just this book as it stands, if you gave it a different title and it was just like improving DevX at large organizations or something like that, it could still be half the length. And I think it would be better for it.
Yeah, this gets back to the less is more idea.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. I feel weird being this critical, but I also am. We want to honor our audience. We think that this podcast really is. Should I read this book? Right. These guys are discussing this. These are software engineers. They care about the craft. Should I read this book?
Right.
And the ideas in this book are so good. I wish it was more succinct. I really do. Like there, and maybe we'll get into this. Well, who do you recommend this to? Right?
We can swap it up a bit as far as who we recommend it to. Like, look, anyone who, if you are an engineering leader tasked with improving DevX at a scale up or large Silicon Valley style tech company, this is the book for you. This is like the handbook. This is how you should do it. You can tell that it's a lot of Nicole Forsgren and Abi Noda's direct experience is in this book. I mean, it's a fantastic book for you. I think there's probably 500 of those people in the world, right? So, do you write a book that only 500 people are going to get a ton of value out of? I mean, personally, I wouldn't. But, if that is you, hey, that's great. This is a fantastic book for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the audience that we get cover to cover value out of this is pretty small. That being said, I think the ideas in here are super powerful. I think if you are in the like Pokemon, gotta catch them all DevOps books, and I think I said the same thing. I said this is specifically for platform engineer and DevX focused leadership, right? Like this is exactly the target audience. I'm glad I read the book. I probably would have put it down after reading the first half or so and skimmed the rest of it, right?
I'll also say with Book Overflow, and we've been honest about this in the past, many of the books we read, I never would have finished if we did not have the podcast as a forcing function to make us read them, which isn't because the information in them isn't great, but just because, it's challenging to read technical books. And I will say, maybe this is, death by faint praise, but we didn't quit reading this book, and we have done that in the past. And not only have we done that with a book that we actually did an episode on, but there have been books where we have started reading them and we've said like, we're not even gonna go further with this, and we just don't even produce an episode on it.
And I will tell you, if you like the ideas in this book, first of all, Pragmatic Engineer
yes,
Gerge is a huge fan of DX, of Abi. Abi's done guest write posts and things. Also, Abi has his own Substack called Engineering Enablement. It's like part of the DX ecosystem. Nice. If you like the ideas from this, I would highly recommend checking that out. I think he just had one on like how Dropbox does certain stuff, and it's really good. Like I read every one of his newsletters. They're super, super good. And so if you want to get 80% of the value and also have it overlaid with like topical, sort of like breaking news, sort of, academic papers on DevX that come out and things like this, and his thoughts on it. That's where I would spend my time, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're actually implementing a DevX initiative from scratch or trying to recover from a failed set of attempts and you've joined an organization and you really need the heavy hitters insights on DevX specifically, I think you can pass on this book. And I say that as somebody who has the deepest of regards for these two authors.
Right. Well, so with that, I guess, yeah, we swapped up a bit. I mean, as far as what you're going to do differently in your career, because you read this book, what are you thinking, Nathan?
This book just kind of is a prime. It just primed me for this, which is improving the techniques around focus time in the lens of DevX is something I need to bring to the table. Like a lot of times I get into architecture and CI/CD optimizations, but making sure that I'm also helping organizations solve for improving focus time is something that it really drove it home that like this should be part of my consulting practice as well.
Right.
For engineering, the health of the organization is focus time is a big part of that.
Yeah, for me, I was already planning on doing this, but it's a good reminder. We are moving to a mono repo at my company, and we've had a front end mono repo for a bit, but we're getting the back end and like our Terraform and a lot of other stuff in there. And I just really want to lock in our mono repo DevX experience. I just want to make sure that we're not we don't have like overly burdensome git commit checks, and that when we do, we're not linting the entire mono repo every time we commit. Right? Like I just want to be good about that. So yeah, good book's a good reminder. And that wraps us up for this week, folks. That is Frictionless by Abi Noda and Nicole Forsgren. Nathan, what are we reading next?
Yeah, what are we reading? I think it might actually be another Will Larson book.
Yeah, Crafting Engineering Strategy: How Thoughtful Decisions Solve Complex Problems.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, I'm excited to read Will Larson. We're doing, that's a two-parter. So we're going to read the first half and the second half there. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. You can always find us on Twitter at Book Overflow Pod. I'm on Twitter at Carter Morgan. You can contact us at contact@bookoverflow.io. Go to the website bookoverflow.io to see our schedule, some of our past episodes. Nathan and his newsletter is at rojorabato.com/newsletter, and that's where the work for his consulting agency is as well. Stay tuned for our episode with Carl Brown. That's going to drop a special sneak peek. We try not to give it, we like it to be a surprise, but honestly, I'm just so jazzed because it was such a great interview. I'm hoping you guys enjoy it. This is dropping on a Monday. That should drop the Thursday following that Monday. So check it out. All right. Thanks, folks. We'll see you next week for another Will Larson, Crafting Engineering Strategy. See you, folks.